Apollo Road, episode 002. My guest is Maude Andrade. Maude is a mixed media painter, and I'm going to go ahead and just quote the bio from her website because it's much better than mine. She grew up in a family of artists and eccentrics. She has lived in Tennessee, California, Maine, New Hampshire, and New Mexico, where she has spent most of her life. In 1987, she graduated from the University of New Hampshire with a Bachelor of Science in Botany and a minor in Chemistry. Maude is no stranger to the art show circuit, and she's also one of those crafty artists who has diversified her income and her work and is very calculated in the way she approaches her artistic expression. And I like that. I think as a business student, student of finance myself, I tend to balance the creative and the brutal pay the bills at the end of the month mentality. So I'm glad that Maude had a lot of wisdom to share as an experienced artist and businesswoman. So without further ado, please welcome Maude Andrade. Maude, how's life been as an artist?
Well, life as an artist has been phenomenal. It's been tiring. It's always educational. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
That's actually what one of my other guests said exactly. Is like, wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a common theme with many artists. Mm-hmm. And how long have you been, in the arts, or whatever you'd consider that is professional or amateur? Or...
Yeah. I guess because I grew up around an artist, I feel like art's been in my life since day one.
Mm-hmm. And who was that? Was it your relative? Mother?
Well, my mother. And so she always had a studio, funky, super funky, nicer as I was more like in later grade school and junior high. So she would I feel like I got an education, I call it homeschooling, mm-hmm. art homeschooling. Mm-hmm. So that's how I learned. And partly because she went to art school and was an artist, she forbid art classes. So I was never allowed to take them unless it was somebody she maybe sanctioned, and that was a workshop. And I never really thought about being an artist, but I grew up around artists, and I certainly knew from an early age that they were different. And she tells a story over and over that I always said, "Oh, Mom, your friends are so much more fun than Dad's."
I'm sure she loved that comment.
Yes, she did. I mean, she's told it for many years. And tell me the beginning of the question again.
Just like how long and when you consider your career as a whole, whether it was pretty defined or you kind of got into it with a meandering path.
Yeah, I stumbled into it. And so I went to college trying not to be an artist because my mother, she didn't say don't be one, but my parents said, go learn something where you can have a career. And
that's the speech I got before college.
Did
so
you?
They totally understand.
and my son is not an artist, mm-hmm. and I'm kind of happy for that.
Right.
Because as much as I wouldn't trade this for anything, it's also hard.
Yeah, the risk is, I'd say, it's very understated. I mean, it's easy to see go to someone's gallery opening, and because they're there, that must mean that they're making it and they're doing well, right? But any artist will tell you, like, they might have just barely got there and they don't know where they're going after that. And so I think that's one of the hard things to convey is how risky it is as a broad field. And so that's interesting to hear.
But then also, I have known many, many artists that I respect immensely. I mean, who I think are just fantastic. And a lot of them don't get any traction in the art world at all.
Why do you think that is?
I think they're too far ahead, and the general art public, art gallery can't handle their work, or or they haven't caught up to it yet. I've watched many people who are too far ahead of a curve get slammed, and then in a few years other people are doing whatever they were doing.
Right. That's interesting because it's, in the art realm, there's the market of people that are making a living on it, and then there's people that are really pushing the boundaries, and they don't always, it's not always the same people, and it's usually the ones pushing the boundaries are, it's either not their main source of income, or it is, and they're just so talented that it's just pushing them forward.
Yeah.
But it's such a weird, what's a weird mix.
And then the other thing I think is very defining is that I know many people who are really good, and they can't cope with the business part of it. And I myself feel like sometimes I'm good at it, and a lot of times I'm not.
Right.
And the older I get, and the more I understand how much of an introvert I am, and a contrarian, I know that's one of my failings in a lot of this, is not working the system well.
Right, and that's common. I definitely agree with you and identify with the introvert and contrarian point of view. But I do know that you sell on Etsy. Yeah. So that's a great, that's, you're utilizing the tools. That's like a new tool for a lot of artists. Yeah. Has that been going well?
It is. I really like Etsy. Now, there are problems with Etsy, but I'm laughing because I feel like the folks that created Etsy, which I'm very thankful for, my impression is that they feel like they invented the craft movement and the DIY movement. And as far as, because my mother was, in one of the original craft movements, started some of the original craft fairs here in New Mexico, they've missed a whole history.
Is that just in like the literature or how they phrase things?
Everything. Like, it permeates the whole thing. Now, that being said,
right.
I feel like the ACC crowd had taken...
And that's American Craft Council. Yeah.
Had taken the craft business to a certain place, and they haven't moved it forward. And I do feel like Etsy has moved some of the online selling forward. And, I love it because it's the quickest, easiest way to have a website. It's safe. I love it because I can get an order while I'm at my day job. Right. And I can go home and I I stock, so I can pack and ship, 5 minutes, done.
Right. How long have you been officially like selling on Etsy?
Since 2009.
2009. So you were really early, actually.
Yeah, and
really
I was
early.
really terrible at it, too. So I didn't sell very much.
And I'd imagine back then, so you might not have been terrible at it so much as it wasn't really commonplace to buy art online. I can't remember that far because I wasn't really, I was in high school. Now it's like you expect everything online, and it is. But back then, I'm trying to think that was still,
Well, so let me give you an example. So I think my photos for that kind of thing are different from what I was used to. Then I didn't understand tagging. And so it never occurred to me to use my name in the tags, which is very simple, basic stuff. But I figured if somebody was finding me, they already knew my name.
Right, so they would just search your name and it would pop up.
Yeah. So the other thing that I think is great about Etsy is it gave me an education in just online and building a website. Now, I don't code, so I haven't built a website, but then the learning curve on any template that I've used has been much, much faster since I did Etsy. Yeah.
That's a good point. It does teach you, some of the modern technologies in a way you wouldn't expect, right?
And then I also think that it's been a great education in watching people who are super successful on Etsy. Why are they? And their product, why their product is so good, why it sells so much. And so conversely with what I've always done, which predominantly the clothing on Etsy, has always been black t-shirts or black whatever. So it's not the easiest thing to photograph.
Right.
And then you take some local folks like Kay and Molly Textiles, which I think is like the perfect model for an online business, it's for, direct sales and online. You can photograph it, it's bright, it's graphic, you can ship it easily.
Right.
It's gift, it's personal.
And the price point on that is definitely in the realm of most people, I'd imagine. Yeah. Okay, so there's a couple of points there that I wanted to follow up on. So you said that the tagging in regards to your name was a big step. I think, and I've heard this from other sources, but this day and age, the way to really get by is to turn your name or yourself into a brand, because nobody else can outcompete you on yourself. And I think that's a great point, that you're representing your work, and if people know your name, they're going to know your brand, and it's easier for them to get into your brand and explore, right? And I think a lot of artists don't realize that they do that. I mean, by the nature of making something and selling it to somebody, it kind of has your name on it, right?
Yeah, and that gets into the buzzword of authenticity. And you can't, I can't be what I'm not.
Right.
So I would see other people.
Well, I mean, you could, but people are good at seeing through that now.
They
pick
are.
up on it fast.
And
I've
you
noticed.
can't. I couldn't keep up with it.
Yeah.
Maybe if you had an art department or
Right.
somebody directing it, you could. But you have to be who you are.
Right.
But it brings up one of the downsides of Etsy specifically, in that, like, let's say I purchase a pair of earrings, which I did, which I love. I went back to find them, and all I remembered was that I purchased it on Etsy. I didn't remember the person's name or business name. Now, it was obviously in my search and my purchases, but that is one of the downsides of Etsy.
It's easy to just kind of pass things on or forget. That is an interesting balance, because it is a great, it's an access to a market, right? Everyone's kind of there to buy something.
Yeah. Now, the other thing that I can tell my sales are driven on there by boutiques and especially in New Mexico, let's say especially Santa Fe, somebody's traveling and they come and buy one of my t-shirts at the store. But it's a higher end t-shirt, so they only get one. And then if they fall in love with it, then they'll buy from me on Etsy. That's where they find me.
Right. And so explaining the t-shirts that you make, because they are very high quality.
Yeah, so they're made of organic bamboo and cotton. And the wonderful thing about bamboo is it's strong. And then specifically with black, which is the most of my sales, it doesn't fade. It holds dye, not like a cotton t-shirt,
right?
Which will turn dull or grayish.
Turn like that steel blue kind of after a while.
And so I also know now from experience that you can have these shirts for about 6 years, wash them once a week, throw them in the dryer on high. You don't have to pamper them. And at about 6 years, you might get a hole in them. And I've used other t-shirts out there from other companies, and they fall apart in 2 to 3 years. Yeah.
Which is not bad for a t-shirt, but it's not ideal. And so, like, with a stronger t-shirt, I mean, you just get,
And so that's why when I've sold the higher end t-shirts, people will, and especially men, and I cater mostly to men now, they're kind of hesitant about it. Right. Well, why is this? And is this really going to be worth this?
Right.
And now I have men, I have a wonderful, loyal following of men. They come back and they're like, oh, my shirt finally wore out. Oh, I'm so glad you still have it. And they'll replace what they bought, 6, 8 years ago.
Yeah. And I still have the T-shirt that you gave me. I mean, it was probably about 6, 7 years ago now. And yeah, like you said, it's still, black as night.
Yeah. But the evolution of working on these shirts was, I used to print hand-woven fabric that I made. Mm-hmm. And so I made this really high-end clothing. And I got to a place where I didn't want to do that, and the market was changing. And so I didn't really think this out, but looking back now, I realized, well, of course, I would gravitate towards working on a high-end T-shirt, and I know that market. And essentially, in the downturn in 2008, mm-hmm. The people that had money but maybe not quite as much, they would buy the shirt but not the high-end clothing. Mm. So it was a real natural progression for me. Mm-hmm. The other thing is it's given me a niche in that a lot of people who are more into T-shirt printing for the graphics, and that's not to say that I'm not, they don't understand that market. And they don't, and I say that, because nobody's pushed it the way I have.
Yeah, and that's good insight because, I don't know if you kind of could sense that as you were transitioning, like, oh, there's something here, and I haven't really seen anything that's a direct, comparison, and so maybe.
Well, there was certainly on the West Coast, especially LA mm-hmm. and boutiques out there, I would watch, the $75 T-shirt. Mm-hmm. They're not printed, but I always kind of paid attention to that. And then, as you know, when you go to a craft show, the public will tell you what they want immediately. Yeah. So the first show I did with the T-shirts, I had organic cotton from American Apparel, mm-hmm. and I had the bamboo shirts. Mm-hmm. And nobody would buy the cotton once they touched the bamboo. And
it was over.
That was over. That was my market test.
That's okay. So this is a great segue into art shows.
Yes.
And I think you touched on one of the best features of an art show is that it's literally an A/B test or ABC test for your work because you get, thousands of people walking through, they'll come in your booth, give you free, they're giving you free advice.
Yep.
So art shows.
Yeah.
When was your first one?
that I did on my own?
Yeah.
It was in front of the co-op in Nob Hill.
Okay.
And I want to say late 80s, early 90s.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Wow. Co-op in Nob Hill in the 90s. That in my mind that's like
the dinosaurs.
The glory days. I mean, so my parents had the Moderna retail store in Nob Hill, but it was
this was way before that.
Right. And so this was in the late 90s. So I remember vaguely what that scene was like. So I can't even imagine, if it was, 10 or more years before that even, how, just original and authentic. And I'd imagine it's got that kind of feel to it.
That one specifically didn't.
No.
But other ones did. But there are a bunch of things I want to talk about that. So it wasn't too far off the heels of trickle-down economics from Reagan.
Sure.
So my first check from the first thing I sold was written from Sandia. People who had jobs at Sandia.
Right, at the labs.
And I thought, and I thought, there's trickle-down. The defense industry just bought a piece of handmade, woven, whatever it was that I was selling.
Right.
So there was trickle down. Now, the other thing you probably don't know, and I don't know if I ever told you, it was the first time I did Scottsdale on my own, or maybe second time. Mm-hmm. You were baby. Mm-hmm. And I met your parents through Eduardo.
Oh, wow.
And so your parents were setting up the outdoor playpen in the grass by the booth. And we all, had our booths nearby. So Yeah, that was when I first met you, first met your parents.
Wow. Okay. So I have heard some of the stories about
Yeah.
that playpen. I don't remember any of that, but that gives me a good context for the timeline.
So I have in my history 2 heydays.
Okay.
So my mother, the heyday of New Mexico in the 70s, craft shows, that was hippie extravaganza heyday of craft shows. That was one sort of thing. And then I guess it was I associated a lot with your parents, of some of those years on the East Coast at the Baltimore ACC shows. And so for me, it was, I want to say 94 to about early 2000s.
Okay.
But it was those late 90s that were really big for me.
That sounds about right from what my dad has told me and what I vaguely remember. And so for the people that might not understand, give us the context as to the difference between that little show in Nob Hill and the Baltimore show.
Yeah.
Because those are very different animals.
Yeah. Would be like third world market to, fancy high-rise New York City. Yeah, that was a world of difference.
Right.
And speaking to that, I mean, when I first made that step to selling on the East Coast, and I went the first year, and I had on all my Western down jacket because the shows were in the winter, and I was in Baltimore, and I went to one of the markets, and I realized I was not in a great neighborhood, and I stuck out like a sore thumb. And when I went home, I bought a completely separate wardrobe, only for the East Coast.
Right.
And it lived in my closet, and I pulled it out once a year.
That's very enlightening for people that don't know that, back then, just you could be in the wrong neighborhood in 2 minutes. Oh yeah.
I was seriously lost, and I was seriously not in a safe place. And I looked at this woman and I said, I really need you to help me get back.
Was that like the first day after you'd set up and set up the show?
Yeah.
And you were
Yeah. Well, and I was, staying at the Days Inn, and the people checking in front of me was a hooker and her John. I mean, it was those were the days.
Man, that sounds like the days. I mean, now it's just safe travel and sleeping in the vans.
So let's fast forward to when I knew the drill and I had the right wardrobe and things were good, and I'm staying at the Sheraton, and times were good enough that you didn't have to share a room with somebody.
Right.
And so you do Baltimore, and then I had a limo driver who would pick me up on the dock at the end of the show and drive me to New York with, the majority of my samples. And then Josh would, I had 2 booth setups. So the Baltimore booth would be left in Baltimore, and the second setup would be in New York. And I, get dropped off at the hotel near, right around the corner from Carnegie Hall and what was that deli that Woody Allen always went to? Carnegie Deli. And so 57th Street. And he'd drop me off, and I'd take the bags up, get a drink at the bar, and then set up the next day.
Man, that's okay, so I'd say you're definitely in the upper tier of artists who really, took it as as serious a profession as you could. There's definitely different levels, different, interests in that whole way of selling. And not everybody, did the full-blown shows every year, all year for however many decades. So what was your experience doing your first couple of shows and then realizing, I'm going to do more of these?
Well, the first couple of big shows, I knew that I had to learn a lot more. Yeah. I was a country bumpkin in that respect. And I also had to toughen up with the buyers. I was very naive.
What do you mean, like negotiating,
Yeah.
or if people just come in for general information?
No, negotiating the business part of it. And then, but the wonderful thing about the craft community, which I'm sure you know, is that I would just ask somebody something, or,
Right.
oh my gosh, I'm having this problem. And then they would help you. And, you know, one of the classics that sticks in my mind was this very sweet couple from Minnesota, did jewelry, and she did these baskets, and I said, you know, what do you guys do with the, you know, COD and the net 30? And that's dating me now. I mean, nobody does that now.
Right. I know those terms. I mean, there's still a few retailers or suppliers that I deal with that it's pretty commonplace, but most people under a certain age wouldn't know what
Right.
the COD is.
And
cash on
don't
delivery.
don't even learn it, because it's bad.
Right.
And so I said, and so, you know, how do you deal with some of these people and the references? And they said, well, you know, the people we know, we give them net 30, and I can't remember what they said about COD. And then they said, and then there's also the NFW category. And I said, what's that? And remember, sweet, gentle people from Minnesota. And they said, it means no fucking way.
They just get a rubber stamp and stamp it on
they would just, no, in terms, they would put NFW, and they said,
Right.
when we get home, we just rip them up.
Wow.
And so when I told my husband this, when I got home, because, you know, I'd had trouble, he said, you can't do that. I said, I certainly can, and I certainly will, and I certainly did. You got to know which ones were NFW.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so good that you mentioned that, you know, you have to toughen up.
Yeah.
I mean, and that is a great example of that. I mean, I think.
But going back to, I think, the original part of that question about, you know, wanting to do it and why I stayed in it, it was all that I want. It was what I wanted to do. And when I started gaining success with it, I mean, I just thrived on it. I loved every minute of it. I loved the people I was meeting, and the ACC shows, I mean, the folks there set a high bar. I mean, and it was scary. It made you really up your game on booth display, quality, you know, just thinking about everything. And interesting, so I had goals, and so, you know, I got in San Francisco, and then I got in Baltimore, and then I consistently got in Baltimore. And then I got in the Smithsonian, which took me 8 years of applications before I got in.
Wow.
And then I was in like 6 times. And then I got in the Philly show, so I still had one more thing I hadn't quite done, and that was getting an article in Ornament magazine and in some of the other magazines. And then I didn't predict this. I never imagined it. Once that happened, I was done. I didn't really have any more goals to chomp at. And it just happened to coincide with, you know, a number of other things, and taking a painting class, and I kind of knew it was over.
About what year was that? You know,
2001.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that was definitely an inflection point, I think, for art shows overall.
Yeah. And I got lucky. So what you're talking about is, it took me, maybe 3 more years, so 2004, like I did a slow exit.
Sure.
And a number of people talked to me after that when I took my paintings to Scottsdale, they said, oh, you were so smart to get out when you did. And it was just sort of dumb luck, but I watched other people who've stayed in it all these years and watched them slowly get kind of ground down.
Yeah. Yeah, that's timing is definitely a huge factor in life, regardless of what field you're in, but particularly for artists. You know, it just made me think that, you know, timing is one thing, but doing art shows, as a career, there's so many factors that are way beyond your control. So it's impressive that, you kind of had these goals. You could see clearly how to get there. I don't know if, you were looking at getting in certain shows because you knew they would kind of connect the dots and it would lead to, if I can just get an article in one of these magazines, it would be like a good arc, and then you're going to get enough publicity, right? So I think it sounds like you had a great planning phase, at some point.
Yeah. I mean, well, there was, I also think there was luck. There was a lot of luck. But then the other thing was that made that luck more conscious, or that there was planning or strategy, was listening to offhand comments from people.
As they're in your booth or walking out, or
certain store owners would just say something that you would then capitalize on, or move a lot. Like if the work I was doing was going kind of in one direction, they'd make a comment and I'd be like, oh, I need to take it back this way, or just change this material.
Right. Can you think of any kind of examples, or do you remember any specific ones?
Yeah. So I had worked with this store. I'd always wanted to get in with this store in the Evanston area. And so they finally invited me for a show. And this was before I was doing the chenille clothing that I got really known for. But I was doing the same thing on cotton. And I sent them a bunch of work. It sold really well. Next year comes around, I send it again, and hardly anything sold. And the store owner said, anything in chenille sold. So I thought, you know what? I can do this on chenille. So that's what I did. And that was when I went to Baltimore, and my business exploded.
That's great, because you were perceptive enough, and maybe perception is one thing, but then as an artist, changing your direction is really hard. If you have a fiery creative spirit and someone's like, if your work were this way, maybe not completely different, but if it were just a little bit more this way, Well,
see, I knew that everybody she was talking about worked in that material and made plaid. It was all plaid. And what I was doing was hand painting. And so I knew that I could do it differently.
Right. So you could take advantage of the trend, but it was still so unique that...
So then the other part of me, and this is very much the contrarian in me and devious part of me. So you know how craft shows you apply with a set of slides in November, the show's in February. Well, that show where she told me that information was in October. So I'd applied, basically. This work didn't exist. And I thought, okay, well, to be with the rules of ACC, how am I going to duplicate the stuff I applied with in this new material so I don't get kicked out?
Right.
Which was a real fear at the high end of things.
Right, because the high end shows, they do definitely police the rules much more than the lower tier shows. So
here's the other funny story about that. So I did it. Very, very clever, I must say. I'm not going to say. Sure. I faked a whole technique. Okay? But I mean, it was real. It wasn't fake. Yeah. But I faked a certain technique. And one of the big competitors in that dyeing technique, when she found out how well I was doing, and when word went around the show how well I was doing, all the matriarchs of the ACC clothing thing all made the rounds to talk to me, because I was suddenly the new kid on the block, but I'd been there 7 years. Right. And so she specifically came by with yarn in her hand and said, I've been trying to do that. And I sat there and I went, oh, I faked this whole thing. How am I going to not tell her that I didn't do that? And I just sat there and played naive and went to, got through it, went to dinner, and I'm not naming names, with my mother. And because who used to help me at the shows, I said, oh my gosh.
That's a powerful image. Just the matriarchs of the, what do you say, fiber, or the clothing?
The clothing.
Just descending upon your booth. I mean, I just imagine.
No, well, they each made their rounds to do that. It was quite deliberate.
Very tactical. Seems like they...
And a lot of the store owners were the same way. Oh, we discovered this new person. And I said, I've been here for years. And again, that was another education in marketing, because my loyal customers from those previous years, they didn't even look at the new work.
Wow.
Yeah.
Ooh, that is tricky. That's... I mean, yeah, because most artists kind of build up a small following and client base in each city, right? Each show, they're there every year. So to maybe risk turning on those patrons, is tough. But if there's a payoff, right? It's always a risk. There's a risk.
I couldn't have. That was a lesson I didn't even know existed until then. And I've had it happen in other things too, down the road.
Yeah, that's. I think that's kind of what you get when your feedback loop is nice and short, and you're getting refined. You can adapt very quickly, and you can also A/B test very quickly. It seems like you do end up hitting a lot of snags and sticky situations, but they're so frequent that you can usually get around them. And if you're doing it in small ways,
you can be more nimble.
Yeah.
Now that we're talking about it, though, that was such a profound lesson that I've used it in many other instances in my creative life. And so the big takeaway was, you have in this case, the garment, the construction dialed in. So let's just change the material. You can change the whole market. So I've done that with the T-shirts. So if you go from a cotton to the higher end, change the market.
Right.
With painting, the same way. And then times when I've been stuck, especially in the clothing, and especially towards the end when I was not quite done with it, what I did was I took away all my familiar materials. And I bought ones that, like if it was dyes that worked, with Formula A, I bought dyes that only worked Formula B. So I had to force myself to work differently. And so that wasn't about market change. It was more about dealing with a creative block.
That is quite profound. And I think that is very hard to do.
It is.
So it's amazing that you've done that and also incorporated that into your process. It sounds like that's kind of, you're not afraid of getting stuck in anymore, I'd imagine.
No, I'm terrified of it.
But you have
truly,
a process. You have a process to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that I find fascinating, is that every artist has a different approach. And some of those approaches seemingly are unconscious. There's some people that it's like it just seems like they just go and go. They're just making things. They're just designing. They don't think about it. I'm much more of the type that wants to systematize it to some extent, and I find that I'm more creative within bounds, right? And I think your example is perfect of keep the design the same, change the material. It's it changes everything, and yet it changes nothing. That's such a good way of...
Well, I'm sure you know that from manufacturing, that let's say you can't get a certain supply from your trusted supplier, and you know that you have to do this stuff, so you order it from a different one, and you're already anticipating whatever the problems are going to be, right? So it's just, the catchphrase I used, I call it working the mistakes. So sometimes those curveballs that are thrown to you lead to the next big discovery. It's not a comfortable place to be.
Sure.
You have to work through it.
Definitely out of the comfort zone. But
Yeah.
that's, that's sort of the dragon metaphor. It's like when you go fight a dragon, right? It's scary and you'll probably die. But if you do somehow succeed, there's a bunch of gold there waiting for you. And that's, so the other artist I interviewed said the same thing. He said, that's just part of the process of figuring out how to work around things and not give up on a project, no matter what.
Yeah, and I think the thing when you said that I would be comfortable with that change, that's one of the struggles, at least for me, as I get older and wiser and maybe have more experience, is you don't allow yourself that as much. Or at least I don't. I'm finding myself being a little too fearful about some of that.
Do you think that's... See, like, I always wonder with people that know that there's certain, like, inflection points in their career where, there was a lot of luck there. There was, I wonder if you start to see the full timeline. You're like, okay, I can't rely on luck every time something... but clearly it's not just luck. And so do you think the fear comes more from just the iteration of it, of like there's going to be that one time where it's different? Or
it's just knowing too much. Let's say an analogy would be music. And we all know that a lot of people, as they age, they don't explore new music.
That's true.
Right?
I know a couple people that are particularly egregious in that area.
Yeah. I think I don't know. I think it's a lot about aging.
Well, that's interesting. I wouldn't consider myself as, a fully grown artist. I was still too young, and I haven't really produced any. I haven't really produced a lot of work of any one type. So while I know that, being creative and working in the creative field is kind of what I'm going to do, for me to kind of imagine it, with some foresight is so it's so weird to me, because I've met so many people like you that have been in the game for decades, and it's just I'm surrounded by masters, master players, and they have seen the ups, the downs. They have a process. They have, a medium or a style, and whether that changes throughout the journey or not, it just gives me an interesting, place, because I know I'm sitting right back here at the starting line, and it's weird just seeing the field.
Yeah, well, I also think what you're facing is a field that's changing faster than what we experienced.
Sure.
Because we used to be able to, people talk to us about 5-year plans and 10-year plans.
Can't have that now.
We're talking, 6 months maybe,
right. Yeah.
if that.
Yeah.
And then I do think, and I've wondered, let's see, back up. I've wondered how you have processed all the people you've been around.
I'm not sure I have.
And maybe you can't, maybe you shouldn't.
Well, that's actually a good point. I'm sure a lot of it's subconscious at this point, and as I think about it,
Yeah.
You're right. There's a point where maybe I shouldn't think about it, because it's, it's kind of more, it should be left to the realm of the unspeakable or something.
Well, I think like anything, you look at different people, like you take various of your parents' friends, and they know all the best in the country. And you say, well, what do I like about that person? What are they doing right that I want to emulate? And that one, I don't want to emulate that.
Right.
And certainly for me in the painting art world, there are a lot of women, older than me that came up through the ranks, and they had to fight. They had to fight for every centimeter they got in the male-dominated art world. And it's made a lot of them not very nice people to be around. And so, for me, I am eternally grateful the fight that they did, because they made it so that my life can be a lot easier can let me, have things that they didn't have.
Mm-hmm.
But I also don't want to be that.
Yeah, I'd say that's a wise decision. I mean, because you're right. It's, you survive too many wars, and what do you become that grizzled general?
Yeah.
That's.
And then I guess the other thing I'd say, and I've tried to do this a little bit more now, is because you know all these folks, you have the amazing opportunity to go and maybe ask for a month internship. Now, I don't, your dad and I didn't necessarily have that to do. I mean, we had to figure it out kind of all on our own. But you have a whole community to tap into of people whose skills actually aren't even being recorded.
Mm-hmm. That's actually a good point. I've definitely thought about the internship approach, and I often feel very undeserving. And
Nah.
I mean, I'm sure, like, not that I wouldn't deserve that opportunity, but that, knowing so many people that started with, literally nothing, or one paintbrush or one tool, and, made it, is humbling to me. And it almost makes me I feel like I have to do it that way, even though there's better and faster ways to do it. It's just a feeling that I get. Not that, I'm going to act on that, but that's my immediate reaction to, trying to learn from everybody that put their lives into it. There was another point that you just made that I was going to talk about, but
I think the other thing is that you just, and this sounds so simple, and I don't know if it's trite, just do.
yeah,
You just got to do it and keep putting it out there. Then the other thing is don't be afraid to destroy stuff too. Just move on, because sometimes there's a piece that you learned from their diary, and someday I would love to put on a show where everybody invited brings their transitional piece.
the one that they didn't dare show the public.
Yeah.
I think that would be very educational for the audience, because I think.
I wonder.
So I
think it would be educational for the artists attending, and I think some of the audience. I think
Sure.
some of the audience. I don't know if they'd make the connections.
And actually, that's you're right. I think the artists would definitely recognize it and appreciate it immediately. The disconnect between the artist and the patron or the audience, right? Because not everybody in the audience is a patron, so I should define it broadly. That a lot of the audience just doesn't really know, or doesn't know how things are made, or how long it takes you, or why. But to me, it seems like the successful pieces are the ones where the person walking by can see your process through the piece. It's not, it's not like, oh, here's your piece that's on the wall and I like the way it looks. They see through it almost. They see what went into it, whether they're conscious of that or not. I think that's...
Yeah. So going back to the New Mexico Arts and Crafts Fair, one time I was a juror. Mm-hmm. And so this was, you actually at that time had to bring the actual pieces. This was before they went to slides, before they went digital. Right. I mean, this was like ancient.
Right.
The thing I learned from that was that good work radiates.
With you, the artist there, or just by itself?
By itself.
Yeah.
It's sitting on a table with all these other things, and all the good work, just has a presence. You can't deny it.
Can't deny it, and can't quite describe it either.
Right.
You know it's special for some reason, but
Well, and so I would suspect that one of the things you might be talking about for yourself, having been at the ACC shows, you were surrounded by the best. Mm-hmm. So, and see if this resonates for you, because this is how things kind of go for me after having done that. It takes a lot to really flip your switch, because you've seen so much that's good. And when you do, you know it and you love it.
Yeah, I can tell you that definitely resonates, because the last few art shows I've been to this year, I'll walk the show real quick just to, cover the ground, see who's there. And it's one or two things jump out at me usually. When I was a kid, I do remember it was like everything was, fascinating. And so now that I think about it, that was a great question, because now that I think about it, you're right. There's one or two things that I notice at every art show that I'm like, that I, want in my space, whatever that is. Yeah, that's definitely something I didn't realize had.
Yeah. So I think you've just,
happened.
you've seen an awful lot for most people haven't.
That's fair. How do you think you would help people that are more of the average population that don't necessarily buy, more expensive artwork, but maybe they'll buy a t-shirt, but they want to move to the next thing or a bigger item, right? How would you help people kind of make that jump?
I'm a firm believer in people trusting their gut. I mean, they have to love it. They have to live with it.
Yeah.
And, all the things that I've purchased or traded over the years, I absolutely love them. And anything I've purchased because it was the trend or everybody else was, it doesn't hold up over time. I think people really need to trust their gut. And then the other thing is let's say they go into a booth and they like something, but they didn't enjoy talking to the artist. Trust that too.
That's a good point. Steve mentioned that in this last episode that, he could tell when people are drawn in by the work, but then as soon as they talk to you, it's almost like magic, where they're kind of, good. And we're going to go through with this, and we're happy. There's always that little bit of hesitation, whether it's, I don't know, but that's not with every buyer, but some buyers definitely.
Yeah, and now I will add a caveat that selling high-end craft and objects, I think all that applies. In the painting world, it's not that way. It's been a totally different experience. I learned that I needed to step back and not talk to people, and that the people I envisioned in my mind, for whatever reason, being drawn to my work, the people who have been drawn to my work, I would never have imagined in a million years.
Did that always translate into a sale, or at least maybe a relationship that, built over the years, and then an eventual sale?
Yeah.
Because that's something I wonder too, is there's plenty of people that can appreciate, whatever they're looking at, and they don't necessarily need it or want to buy it, but it's definitely not a judgment on, the value of it. I think you've hit a point that I've never really been very educated on, and that is like two-dimensional. That for me, like, to value something two-dimensional, it's like I have no concept. It's whether I like it, whether I would pay for it, is kind of my own subjective approach. But it seems like, there's some consensus as to whether, something can be valued at $2,000, whatever it is, and it has to meet certain design, it has to be put together at least halfway decent, right?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily?
No. No, it's a different world. No, there's a lot of ego and a lot of, I've watched a lot of paintings that aren't that good are really selling because the person has a reputation or has pushed those prices up, and how the galleries pushed it. It also kind of depends on what categories you're talking about. I think, like, let's say in still life categories, there are more rules, and there are more, actual, really dimensions you can apply to that, and where something you can say, oh, and this hits all these marks, and that sort of thing. That's a completely different thing. No, in the fine art world, it's whatever you can charge and get and do, and doesn't matter. And I know somebody whose father is a famous artist, and she said that if he put work out in a show and it didn't sell, he'd raise the prices. And believe me, he's a big guy. He's a big dude.
I have an inkling of how this kind of works. That is, the more abstract it is, and the more abstract it is, the harder it is to value and price. Like price specifically in a market.
Sort of,
and
yeah.
I guess the market becomes whatever the last person paid for it, right? And so, I guess to your point, it really doesn't seem to have a cap.
No.
Huh.
I think there are price points where, anything under 10,000 is a certain game. Yeah. Anything over 10,000 is a whole different ball game. And then, certainly for myself, there's sweet spots to price to size, price to square inch.
Do you apply that pretty consistently, or is it sort of just depends on?
I do, although there are certain paintings that I won't budge on, ever. And
just a gut feeling?
No, it's much more conscious. I was lucky enough to be interviewed for the Colores program on PBS.
Okay.
And when I was pulling together all the images for the woman who was producing it, it was a very interesting review for myself. And then I realized that all my favorite pieces I still own. Now, so why is that? Do other people have bought from various series of what I consider good paintings, but not my favorites.
Right.
And so I think that, you hear the phrase, a painter's painter. A lot of my painting friends, those are the pieces they like too. But they're not the buyers.
Right.
So there's certain things that I know, I'm hoping down the road, they'll be worth more, so it's absolutely fine not to sell them earlier. And if I don't, and I'm pretty, not that it's happened a lot, but if I don't feel like a person is worthy of certain of those pieces, I will not budge on selling it.
I like that. That's, that shows me that you're playing the long game. It's evident that you've been playing the long game, but I think, like you said, as you get older, the game kind of changes a little bit, and you start looking back, you start looking forward, you have a better sense of where you're at now.
Well, you'll have to talk to Tane someday when he's sitting on a pile of those paintings.
I'll be sure to take careful notes and record what what I'm supposed to ask about. And
well, and legacy is an interesting thing, and something you said reminded me of. It was in the late 1980s when a national company stole one of the designs of my clothing. And it worked out very well for me. I got a nice settlement. I got a bunch of money for it. But I also had to copyright it. And I couldn't copyright the process or the garment, but I could copyright the graphics. So wherever I can, I do that. And those I can transfer to, my husband and son can inherit those.
Right. Yeah, and that is smart of you to, consider the whole career, and it is like there is an afterwards. Maybe not for every person, but there is an afterwards for your work, and however that is, you want to handle it is, there's plenty of options in that regard. But it's cool to see that you've thought about that and set a plan for it, at least part of it.
Well, and the other thing I do with the paintings, and I need to do a little bit more now, is I destroy stuff.
Actually
So,
destroy it.
I do.
Physically destroy it.
Yeah, I do.
Do you have a ceremony?
No. No,
Private
I
destroying.
do it quickly so that my husband can't say, "Don't do that," and I don't chicken out.
Yeah.
But yeah, they go to the dump.
Well, I think that's a great place to end. The creation of something and the destruction of something.
Yeah.
It's all the process. Tell people where they can find you, where they can find your work.
So let's see. My new studio is in the North Valley of Albuquerque, and you can contact me via email from my painting website, maudeandrade.com. Then painting-wise, Mariposa Gallery represents a lot of my abstract work. Patina Gallery in Santa Fe represents mostly the work that I do with graphite. And let's see, T-shirts, Mariposa, Spurline, and Red River Mercantile.
Awesome. And then you mentioned your website. Do you have any other social media?
Yeah,
contact
Instagram,
points?
Mod 1 on Instagram. I don't do Facebook, don't do Twitter, and I barely keep up on Instagram.
Perfect. Well, Maude, it was a pleasure. Well,
Thank you.
As this project kind of progresses, we'll definitely have you back on because I
Okay.
think you're one of the elites, and you have plenty of experience and knowledge and stories to share. So,
Well, what I want is we need to get you on the other side, and we need to ask you more questions.
that episode will come in time.
Okay.
Promise. All right.
All right,
Thanks.
thank you.
Hey, thanks again for listening. Get in touch at apolloroad.com/podcast. Again, this is my bootstrapped project, and if you want to get in touch with me or any of the artists on the podcast, just head over to that link and support the podcast. I think I'll put up a survey for listener feedback and artist feedback. So, yeah, have at it. See you next time. Thanks.